So if I were to give you a giant box of Legos, a variety of shapes and sizes and types, what would the longest bridge that you could build be that would be able to hold 3 heavy containers of Play-Doh? What is the fewest number of bricks required to do this, and what factors influence the strength of the bridge? This is effectively the kind of driving question that you might preface a project-based lesson on. This is Chris Cozort, and this is the NETS T3 portion of the Academy of Blended Learning through Santa Clara's online learning courses. And so without further ado, there's my contact information. If you have any questions about what we're going to be talking about today, you can of course use this contact information and send me an email. We're going to skip our interactive piece and look immediately at NETS T3 in the context of project-based learning. First of all, what is it? It's modeling of digital age work and learning. And teachers are going to exhibit knowledge, skills, and work processes representative of an innovative professional in a global and digital society. Teachers will demonstrate fluency in a technology systems and the transfer of current knowledge to new technologies and situations. So we're looking at a little bit at novelty and solving novel problems with that tech. Collaborating with students, peers, parents, and community members using digital tools and resources to support student success and innovation. Communicating relevant information and ideas effectively to students, parents, and peers using a variety of digital age media and formats, and modeling and facilitating effective use of current and emerging digital tools to locate, analyze, evaluate, and use information resources to support research and learning. And each one of these 4 key points under the NETS T3 standard speak towards project-based learning, which is really just the authentic learning process associated with giving students a project based on what's called a driving question, which we're going to key on in a little bit. This is the assignment for this unit. It is to create a project-based learning unit that could be used in your school and post your unit plans in this Canvas assignment. So be sure to specify your targeted grade level, relevance to your school, really relevance to your class, and the attended outcomes and how those outcomes will be measured. So let's look at how we would construct that. So what is project-based learning? Per the resources, a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to a complex question, problem, or challenge. So students are going to be the focus of the process of gaining knowledge, directed by the teacher, of course, to whatever degree. We'll look at that in a minute. And acquisition of skills occurs as effectively, in a way, a byproduct of the problem or the project. Time spent on the project is extended. That is not the kind of assignment that would take you a day. Usually it's a period of 1 to 2 weeks at least in the course of working through a unit in project-based learning. So here's a little video from Edutopia. I'll go ahead and post this to the site. We're not going to walk through it right now, but key elements of your project-based learning environment. Frame the project with a driving question. Like we did in the introduction here, giving the students a task and asking them effectively an open-ended question or questions to frame the dimensions and concerns of the project or problem. Defining the end product and work backwards. What do we want students to do? Do we want them to build a bridge? Do we want them to write a sonnet? Do we want them to create a paper that does a comparative analysis between 2 phenomena? Those kinds of things. Research and rigor using your C's. So plan, identify sources, investigate, capture, log, and critically evaluate your information. Work your findings, reflect, revise, and reconsider. Maintain a work in progress, adding, deleting, considering, reconsidering, and revising the emerging work. So there's a continuum of work, and we'll talk about that format in a moment, but essentially the culmination or the summative piece of this is the project itself and how it's presented, but working into that is a continuum of measurement and feedback. And moving the audience beyond the teacher in the classroom to the world, show your findings through a public source. Now, if we're creative, of course, this doesn't just mean inviting in a panel of folks to review. It can be that. It could also be posting it to a YouTube video and having parents weigh in, directed by you, of course, depending on what's appropriate. And so there are a lot of different ways we could leverage technology, or just your community, your nearby community. In other words, bringing in a class next door, maybe a grade level below or above. In the case of it being below, it could be an opportunity to show students coming into that grade level what they're able to produce in the future. And then, of course, if you bring in a grade level above, they've had the experience of the project, and so they might be able to be coached through the process of providing constructive feedback. So moving that audience outside of the class itself, students choose and direct their work independently. Defining the structures that allow students to take responsibility for completing their project independently is important in the sense that it is not entirely open-ended, and certainly depending on student experience, it may need to be more or less directed by you. Here we go from our sources. We are looking at the model for project-based learning and what we hit on with it. We've got significant content, meaning something that will have meaning, whether it be meaning in the context of the curriculum or meaning in the context of the affective domain or where the students are. And then 21st century skills, of course, speaks to the types of skills required to accomplish these goals. Creativity, collaboration, etc. are going to be involved down here. So if we look at significant content, at its core, the project is focused on teaching students important knowledge and skills and deriving the standards and key concepts at the heart of the academic subjects. 21st century skills are going to be looking again at those C's: critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, communication, and so on. And around these, let's start with in-depth inquiry. Students are engaged in a rigorous extended process of asking questions, using resources, and developing answers, guided by the teacher, assessed by the teacher, almost always formatively throughout the process, leading into the culmination. A driving question is, of course, project work is focused around this open-ended question. It's open-ended in the context of what your curriculum dictates or what the goals that you're trying to achieve throughout the process. It's not obviously completely open-ended. It's open-ended based on maybe how to solve the problem initially with your guidance. And the level of guidance depends on age appropriateness again and experience. So we want to frame those things around that. Students feel compelled to know it. It applies in some relevant way to either other things they're studying in other classes, or something that is going on in the world. So an entry event frames this, and that's why current events or things in the community tend to be really good anchors in terms of working with an entry event, or just obviously this is like your anticipatory set, so it's something exciting, something generates interest and curiosity. In my live session, we poured out a bucket of Legos, or had a bucket of Legos, and started with that question, and it generated a lot of engagement and interest. And I think where we're at with project-based learning, the kinds of outcomes that you get in the course of project-based learning aim more at, again, those 21st century skills. 21st century based skills like creativity. It also really hits on that sometimes elusive engagement component for students, and that's what this whole piece is really all about, is initializing that engagement. Voice and choice means students get to make choices. They own it. They own their learning and knowledge. It's very constructivist in that sense, and how they use their time guided by the teacher, and depending on the age level. And of course, PBL experience is an important one, and maybe not one immediately considered, but of course we want to consider the level of immersion in the PBL experience based on maybe if students have never had that experience before, and polling students prior to this to get some context depending on grade level and age is helpful. Revision and reflection are a part of that continuum that we've talked about. The project includes processes for students to use the feedback and consider additions and changes that lead to high-quality products. There is a continuum of failure usually, especially in applied hands-on projects, which really these all should be. In the case of writing, it's a revision process. In the case of engineering, it is a prototyping, troubleshooting, failure continuum that allows them to see what doesn't work well and revise and improve. So that continuum of revision and improvement is what this is really all about. And students dictating to go back one last bit on this, students sort of dictating that process in the sense that they're determining what needs to happen for that improvement with guidance. So the public audience, again, can come in many forms. It's strictly speaking and logistically speaking not just about your people coming in from the outside in a panel of experts. It could be parents, it could be the classroom next door, it could be Skyping or FaceTiming with a small group of people on the other end of that. But definitely allowing students to be questioned to whatever level it's appropriate about their work and to have it vetted in that way. So how do we design this? Well, a couple of different suggestions are out there, whether you're looking at Edutopia or other sources. There are a couple of authors who suggest, first, of course, looking at the raft piece. Here, the raft piece speaks to what roles will students have in the project, in the group. And we are speaking primarily towards group-based, project-based learning. So what role will each student have? Do those roles rotate? Are they based on their strengths or their weaknesses initially? And how do you manage that? So this is a whole management piece. Here, the audience, of course, is something that we mentioned, which is critical. And then coaching students towards being able to present for a specific audience in an appropriate way. The format of the project, the format of the product, is it multi-format? Do they have many different formats as options, or do they have a singular format that's standardized? In many cases, a video with a script and a presentation, that's an example of maybe a standardized format where you might allow them to have multiple formats for a product to express what they learned. But usually we're talking about the delivery of data or some form of a product in a visible way. And then, of course, topic is actually in many ways subordinate to these, although this isn't necessarily in any specific order. But the topic itself is critical as it relates to that driving question, and how does the topic feed into that, or vice versa. So how do we assess? An assessment throughout the continuum of, say, a 2-week project is critical, and it is all based on these check-in and assessments driven by formative assessment, which is to say that this formative assessment informs the students' trajectories of what they're learning about and how they're learning about it, and what they can do to improve or learn about new things in the process of doing this project. Of course, it also relates back to what the teacher needs to supply in terms of support. So a lot of this, of course, occurs in real time. And it may occur formally in the sense that it is written and should, probably be in that format. A student blog that allows them to blog about their project, that allows other students and teachers to comment on that, is an excellent engine for formative assessment throughout the process. And then managing it falls on, the burden of this, of course, falls on all parties involved, teachers and students. How are you assessing the roles of the students, and if there is a management role, how is that going? And if there isn't, how are they all managing themselves, and how are you managing what needs to happen to get them to a quality product? So these things all interrelate. And how would we assess? Well, again, assessment throughout is formative. It is peer assessments, it's graded milestones or check-ins, and graded is in quotes because, again, through formative assessment there is a measure of allowance for failure. This isn't a did you get the problem right type of grading. This is more, are you working towards a solution through your failures or your problems. So that's what that looks like. And then fast feedback is, of course, always important in a feedback loop in a classroom, but particularly here it needs to be throughout in order to lead them towards a quality product. Self-assessment for students, this is load balancing the assessment process between you and the students. A percentage of that needs to be self-assessment, and they need to be essentially assessed based on both your input and the input of their peers. So summative assessment is ultimately that final piece, that final project, and that would be something that's outlined in your rubric, which gives them clear expectations of an endpoint and allows them to aim at that final target based on that driving question ultimately. So let's go ahead and move down here and take a look at a rubric for project-based learning. And we'll come back one level here. So I'm going to go ahead and post this as well, but there is a project design rubric that is on the Buck Institute for Education. If you've registered with this site, you'll see it. But let's go ahead and look at the rubric elements here. Essential elements of PBL includes, again, significant content, 21st century competencies, in-depth inquiry, and a driving question. And then over here on our last column are best practices. So for example, that significant content, this project is focused on teaching students important knowledge and skills derived from standards and key concepts. With regard to 21st century skills, a small number, or a limited number rather, of important 21st century competencies are targeted. There are adequate opportunities to build on these competencies. In other words, if we're talking about creativity and collaboration, a lot of times that just involves giving students that voice and choice and then letting them run with it, letting them self-assess, letting them peer assess, letting them think about the problem and solve the problem with guidance. Students working in collaborative teams, of course, is a big piece of this, and there needs to be modeling and there needs to be accountability and certainly assessment components around that piece. Students may collaborate with people beyond the classroom. This is an interesting one. This is the idea of using maybe older grades or parent experts or anything really. The sky's the limit within what's appropriate and what's contextually appropriate. There are lots of different ways to do this. Students are asked to analyze and solve problems, think critically. So I think we get that. Inquiry is academically rigorous. Students pose questions and gather and interpret data. This is a project, and it will involve research and data gathering. The driving question, which is the key element, the first key element of this, is going to capture the main focus, is open-ended. We're not giving answers. We're asking questions throughout this process, starting with the driving question. The DQ is understandable and inspiring to students. Again, that opening event or that anticipatory set is critical in introducing that driving question. And students will have to gain skills throughout this process. So while you can front load with, say, the Pythagorean theorem, or how to find the area of a circle, or how to write a haiku, or whatever the skills that students need to have throughout this process can be front-loaded, they will gain skills in the process. That's the key. So looking at the criteria over here, what do they need to know? The project motivates students to learn new content. It excites them in some way. And the entry event, again, will be powerfully engaging. Students are going to have the opportunity to express voice and choice. Again, they are the active participants. They own the learning. Students are provided with regular structured opportunities to give and receive feedback. This could, again, be through a blog. It could be through your learning management system, and a variety of other mechanisms. And so how would they constructively critique each other's work? Setting up a culture in the classroom prior to the project is good in terms of constructive feedback, giving one positive remark and one remark on what they would fix or do differently, and getting students comfortable with that peer review, again, depending on age appropriateness. At key checkpoints after the culmination, the teacher is going to engage the students in these thoughtful pieces, and there's the continuum of feedback again. And then for our last piece, the public audience. Students are going to present or exhibit their work to something or some group of people beyond just the classroom. So a good example of that, or an example of the public audience piece, would be a science fair or group-based science fair type scenario, or bringing in outside folks, or just Skyping, or bringing in a class nearby. And then the defense, or defending them in detail and in depth in terms of the projects, of course, is also age appropriate, but it allows students to explain their line of thinking, how they came to the conclusions that they came to, how they designed the product, how they were able to construct it as a group. And so that is your project-based learning rubric for mastery over project-based learning. And so to look one last time here at our portfolio, if we go ahead and look at this, we are going to create a project-based learning unit that could be used in your school and post your unit plans to the Canvas assignment. Be sure to specify the targeted grade level. And really we're talking about relevance to your classroom. Not so much school per se, and the intended outcomes and how those outcomes are going to be measured. So one last time for my contact information, Let's go ahead and go back here to me. If you have any questions about project-based learning, I've incorporated it pretty much in all 3 of the classes that I'm teaching on a regular basis. Students owning that learning through project-based learning is always successful for me. And when it's not, I take lots of good notes, so I'm happy to share that. But again, there's my contact info, and if you need any help, let me know. Otherwise, good luck.